Hello and welcome to the Dissidents Podcast, brought to you by the Institute for Liberal Values. This is where we talk about how we can strive for a world in which freedom and reason are at the forefront of all human society. Or should we? In this week's podcast, Elizabeth Spivak and Mike Burke explain why reason is often subordinate to sentimentality, how well the ideological extremes play to that sentimentality, and how poorly those in the centre do. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome back. As usual, please leave a comment, subscribe, or something like that. You know, if you're listening on a podcast, which is what most of you do, apparently. I think anyone watches us on YouTube. Yeah, if you do review, share, all that kind of stuff. So today we're gonna go down, on my end, quite a philosophical route, and I want to kind of tally this up with Elizabeth's understanding as a psychologist. And this is about the role of reason. So if you look at any articulation of liberal values, if you look at any treatment of the Enlightenment, any celebration of the Enlightenment at least, reason is really something that's put out there in the forefront. Reason being the human beings' ability to apply intelligence to solve problems. So one of the absolute best examples of this would be the scientific method. So before the Enlightenment, reason was looked at with suspicion. You could argue, or theologians would have argued certainly, that reason was the thing that got man expelled from the Garden of Eden. God says, you can do whatever you like in the Garden of Eden, but just don't eat this fruit. And then Satan, in the form of the serpent, tries to get man to apply reason. Well, okay, what's the reason for this? Think this through. And man thinks it through and comes to this conclusion that there is no good reason, and therefore it eats the fruit. And that's something that's terrible, that's wrong. So the kind of message is that reason can lead you astray, which is true. And that would then lead centuries of Christian thinkers to argue that you shouldn't really use reason, that you should instead turn to the scripture. Then you later get thinkers, post Enlightenment kind of thinkers, or thinkers of the Enlightenment, certainly. I mean, post the Enlightenment happening, like Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who would argue that we have to use reason now. The cat is out of the bag, but if we could return to a state of nature, then that would be good, right? This is the idea of the noble savage. So there is a kind of a strain of Russellian anti-reason thought, which gives us an admiration of things like Native Americans and the kind of way that they live, and a romanticizing of the way that they lived. In spite of the fact that the empirical evidence shows us that it was brutal, and that the philosopher Thomas Hobbes was actually correct when he said that life in the state of nature would be something along the lines of nasty, brutish, and short. So my argument is not against reason per se. I mean, certainly reason within the sciences has given us medicine, has given us sewer systems and all kinds of great things that have massively contributed to the quality and length of human life. But I have a slight suspicion about reason that it is not, that it remains very applicable, but it is not the sole driver of political life, and that political life and social life is far more driven by sentimentality than it is by reason. That is not to say that reason does not have a part or should not have a part in political and social life. Quite the contrary, I would never argue that. But rather that it is subordinate to sentimentality. Thoughts?
Okay, so I'm not prepared with citations or anything, so I'm going to be...
No, of course. We're shooting from the hip on this one, right?
Yes, we are.
Yeah.
Yes, today we are shooting from the hip, which makes me uncomfortable. I just want everyone to know that I'm uncomfortable shooting from the hip. So I like to have my sources all lined up. Okay, so there's a kind of a, I don't know, famous-ish study that you may have actually heard of in the George Bush era. Like, who would you want to have a beer with? So honestly, I don't, because again, not prepared with my sources. I don't even remember for sure which Bush. So I don't remember which Bush was running against whom. Okay. But it was, people would rather have, they were both from Texas, right? And sort of, the rancher kind of, mentality. And people would rather have a beer with George Bush. And so whichever Bush it was, probably the first. And so that actually was a better predictor, who would you rather have a beer with, than any other political questions. Okay. So that sort of speaks to this, the sentimentality, like who would I want to hang out with? Well, I'd rather hang out with, if it was George Bush, it was the latter, then it would be like what, against Gore. So who would you rather have a beer with, Bush or Gore? Again, I can't remember which one it was, but same idea, right? Like who would you want to hang out with for 15 or 20 minutes or half an hour and just shoot the shit with? Well, that would be Bush. And that was who, and then, he won, obviously he won the election. Also kind of a famous study, on thinking about what you would like to what jelly you would like. And I know that sounds kind of weird, but think about going to one of those grocery stores where they have those tasting centers, okay? And you can or maybe like a farmer's market or whatever, and you can taste the different jellies. They have the crackers, right? And you can put a little jelly on a cracker and taste it, okay? The more options there were, the uh, the less likely people were to end up with a flavor that they actually preferred in the end. So what happens is, you just it's like if you just go with your instinct and you pick the one that it's like, oh, well, I almost always like, grape. I'm just making this up, of course, but I almost always like grape. So I'm going to try the like mixed berry and the grape and the strawberry. And there's only three choices. And that's, and I'm just going to pick. But the more you start to reason it out, oh, I should try something different, or, oh, this one, geez, this is a little sweet. Maybe I should try something different. Pretty soon you talk yourself right out of what your actual preference was. Malcolm Gladwell in Blink, not a psychologist, a journalist, but he does a pretty good, I think a very good job. I've actually signed that book in my classes before. We read the primary sources along with the sort of trade book, analysis, but he does a pretty good job of talking about things like medical malpractice. I think that might be Ambady, Ambady, who does research on medical malpractice lawsuits. And you can tell in just a few minutes of analyzing the interaction between a patient and a doctor, how many, or whether the doctor is likely to have more malpractice suits against them. So it isn't about the doctor maybe making mistakes. All doctors make mistakes now and then, but it's in this interaction and these just few exchanges that are more sort of sentimental, if you will, more empathy focused versus more reason focused, more focused on maybe sort of medical facts. Those who engage with patients with more sentimentality, more empathy, are less likely to get sued. So there's like different evidence of, sort of what you're talking about in the psychological literature. So I'm going to stop there because I could go on.
No, it's absolutely fascinating, and what this plays to is kind of like my philosophical stance, which is as a kind of a conservative, a philosophical conservative. Now, and again, that doesn't mean a conservative that is associated with the Republican Party or the English Tory Party, because I'm in favor of those legitimate changes that have happened within the public consciousness, like, for example, the acceptance of gay rights and trans acceptance that was beginning to be accepted until this rather unfortunate backlash has occurred, which is actually generally not the fault of trans people, but rather of ideologues, most of whom are not trans. So that kind of describes my philosophical position. And it was articulated by Burke, Edmund Burke, same name as me. And he basically said that you should use reason when you're thinking about any given direction in policy, but you should understand that reason has limitations. And if you think that you can make everything just purely out of the realm of this, you imagine this ideal society that is conjured using abstract reasoning and you try and go towards it, that will end up as a disaster. And this kind of foretold the French Revolution and why the French Revolution ended up as a disaster, because that's exactly what they tried to do there, compared to the United States, which the United States, in a way, it did kind of conjure this Declaration of Independence and US Constitution, but it was almost like the colonials back then were almost talking to themselves, right? Because they were articulating the values, and people like Franklin recognized this, right? The values that arose specifically out of English liberalism. And that was why Burke supported it, because the abstract fact doesn't matter. These people are just manifesting the values that they have inherited from their forefathers in the United Kingdom. And so I've really started to think that this is very, very, very important as an observation, and that something is really, really missing when it comes to our critique of critical social justice. So if you look at the likes of, let's give you some big names: Sam Harris, Helen Pluckrose, Steven Pinker, Jonathan Haidt. I'm not going to say a bad word about any of those people, at least not in this. I have a bad word really to say about Helen Pluckrose, but what they do when they're constructing these arguments against critical social justice is they do a really, 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 really good job of appealing to reason. They set out very coherent, logic-based arguments that are very, very well grounded in evidence, and they seem to, from my point of view, as somebody that very much innately values reason, they seem to absolutely demolish with ease the arguments that are being put up by critical social justice advocates like Claudine Gay, for example. And yet, you have these incredibly qualified, in the case of Steven Pinker, very articulate, very well written, very well based in evidence academics making these brilliant arguments that dismantle the critical social justice arguments, which from the perspective of reason look incoherent, very easy to dismantle, and very poorly grounded in evidence. And yet, even within the institutions that are supposed to be the custodians of Western civilization, that are founded upon the liberal principles like reason, like truth, like grounding evidence and arguments, that is their mission statement for generations. Even within those institutions wherein these values, these reason-based values, are supposed to thrive the most, who are charged with protecting and furthering those values, arguments, these great arguments, like the ones that I'm referring to, like the ones offered up by Pinker, by Haidt, by Pluckrose, they're either agreed with, but agreed with in silence. Agreed with, but if you agree with it, you're somebody who stands out as a bit of a rabble-rouser, like a Lee Jussim. Cancelled, if you're Elizabeth Spivak. Regarded as a bit of a weirdo, or, in your case, outright denounced as a bigot.
Mm-hmm.
So within the institutions of Western civilization that were designed to and specifically claim to protect and further the liberal values associated with reason, reason doesn't thrive. And qualifications don't matter. What matters is sentimentality. And this is the thing. The critical social justice arguments, they don't depend upon reason. They kind of do lip service to it, and badly. they do enough of it so that you can pretend that you agree with it, right? Or delude yourself into agreeing with it. But they're very charismatic. They very well appeal to the sentiments. And so it seems that I can't help but come to the conclusion that the arguments that are made by people like Pinker, in spite of the fact that I want to like them more because they are so better argued, and I believe that you should believe them because they represent the truth, at least to a far greater degree than critical social justice arguments, I have to come to the sad conclusion that these arguments are actually weaker than the arguments that are being conjured by critical social justice because they just don't appeal to the sentiments.
Yeah. So there's a couple of schools of thought about emotion you know in psychological research, but one which I think speaks strongly to what you're talking about is that emotion. Now, let me just say there's also a difference between emotions and feelings. Okay.
Okay.
So when I use the word emotion, I'm talking about what's happening in the brain and the body. And when I use feeling, that's what we experience, like the thing that we verbally describe. Okay. So pretty much all emotions have very similar physiological responses. Okay. So, so you can't with, heart monitoring and EEGs and all that kind of stuff, you can't really tell the difference between the emotions. Okay. So heart rate, eyes dilating, you can't really tell the difference, but people report a difference. Why do they report a difference? Well, they report a difference because they're looking at all of the stuff around them to figure out how to name their feeling. And we do this with the kids. You have kids, and so they fall down, and you say, "Oh, have you hurt yourself?" Right? So they learn the word hurt, for falling down and skinning their knee. Well, we learn the same that we learn our emotion words in terms of, are you sad? Are you mad? The same way. So, we start to label things the way that we've been taught to label them. So those are our feelings. Okay. So our emotions are more about what's going on like physiologically. So an emotional, there's a theory that the emotion system is actually a superordinate network. So what that means is that it's affecting all other areas of the brain and the body. Okay. So if you think about it like the emotion network is the orchestra conductor. Okay. And so when you think about the conductor, sort of like, I'm like moving my hand, like, it's like you raise, so he or she raises his hand, his or her hand, and that side of the orchestra, plays louder, right? And then another side, another area is softened. And then he points over to another place, and that section, comes alive. And, you have these, different, sort of this orchestration. Everything is playing together, but some things fade into the background or are silent for a little while and then come back, right? So if we think about the emotion network as what's orchestrating your attention, your motivation, your how you buy, which jelly you choose, and who you want to have a beer with or whatever, that sort of speaks to what you're talking about. Now think about also how this would evolve, in any human or any animals, system to promote survival. So that would be, especially for things that would be dangerous. So that would be the strongest, right? That would be, if we're talking about our orchestra, that would be the section that would always be playing, right? It would like never be silent, because we must always, be monitoring our environment to stay alive. Okay. So even though that section might be playing more softly for a while, it's always playing. And so this there's actually a book written specifically for jury decision making called the reptilian brain, I think, or
Oh, I've
reptile. No,
heard of it.
it's just called Reptile. It's not a great
Okay.
book. It's not a super great book, but it's just called Reptile, and it's actually how to speak to jurors. How to frame your legal case in a way that will speak to jurors' emotional. That emotion system, that sentimentality that you're talking about, and how to win cases basically by appealing to this area of the brain. And one of the reasons why it's called the reptilian brain, which is kind of a, silly name, is because all animals have it, including snakes. And so it's sort of like, oh, it's a, we discourage
Primordial.
that. We
Right.
discourage that in the sciences, but in the actual science of psychology. But it's easy to remember. So if we think about this sort of superordinate network, in many ways, it would, in fact, lead us to better decision making, right? Because it would be, there's a lot of things that we do. I think I've used this example before, but who the hell would get on a plane? I'm sorry. I mean, this is crazy. Airplanes they are big, humongous, heavy things. It makes no sense that they can fly. So we must reason our way into getting on an airplane, which is, oh, it's actually safer than flying. And, we know this, right? So in that way, reason helps us to, go visit people that are thousands of miles away, go visit places that are thousands of miles away. But if we were never able to overcome this superordinate network, if we were never able to quiet that section of the orchestra, there are a lot of things that we wouldn't do. We would have never gone to the moon. If we used reason, we wouldn't get married and have children. I mean, it's a risky proposition. 50% of marriages end in divorce. It's like we just wouldn't do these things if we only used reason. So you're right, like that it makes sense to we respect, reason helps us in a lot of ways, but it also, would hinder us if we used only reason.
I'm in this really strange position. Like, I find myself in a very, very strange position philosophically right now. I wish people would be more persuaded than their reason than they are,
Mm-hmm.
right? I am absolutely persuaded of the arguments of Steven Pinker, for example, on, in Enlightenment now, and about liberal democracies being the best places to live. I entirely agree with him, and I agree with him for all of the reasons that he sets out. So I'm not disagreeing with the likes of Pluckrose,
Right.
the likes of Haidt, the likes of Pinker, and I'm not even suggesting that those books don't have a huge market, and because of course they do, and don't resonate with lots of people. So it's not even a criticism of them, right? It's just I think there needs to be a strategic realignment because it's
Yeah,
not
and
working.
we
It's
need to
not
be
getting
able.
through to people.
They're always making jokes about, say, oh, we need to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. But in a way, it's like, who is doing a better job of that? And, to a large extent, the extreme left and the extreme right are doing a better job of that because they are appealing. And one of the things that, that happens when you appeal to this superordinate network that is evolutionarily superior to the reason network. It predates it. It's in every organism, right? So is that it is going to um, uh, sort of trump reason every time.
Every time.
So you're going to have well, I guess maybe I need to respeak. It's going to if you're making a decision quickly, if you're making a decision, uh, if you're not either able to get a hold of some of these books, for whatever, perhaps they were removed from the library, for example, as we've talked about, or you're just not, for whatever reason, you're not equipped to read those books. Okay. So you don't have the time, the bandwidth, you don't have the, whatever. Then you're going to, of course, be, maybe you're not going to be as plugged in to certain things. Maybe you don't care about the same things. So, you're going to be swayed more by something that's a more sentimental argument. And I think you're right. One of the things that, especially academics and, especially more moderate, people in the middle, whichever, variety they are. One of the aspects of being sort of in the middle, being more open-minded liberal thinker, is that we do hedge, right? And we give space to other arguments. And we don't say, no, you can't say that, or no, you can't do that. And we say, some people may feel this way. Other people may feel another way. We're giving all this space. We have a broader Overton window for everyone to sort of, live in and meander around. And there's an ease, a pull, um, again, in human thinking, to something that is cut and dried. Again, sort of this, your religion example. So there's a rule. And if I follow the rule, then, I don't have to think any more about it. I got more bandwidth. I got more space in my brain to think about other things that I would rather think about, whatever that is. So a set of rules actually eases our navigation of all kinds of spaces. And we do we do this all the time. And so I don't want to, no one should be criticized for following laws, for following traffic rules, for, following, general rules about, certain parenting faux pas, whatever guidelines and that kind of stuff. We follow recipes, right? And, there are all kinds of rules that we follow that make our lives easier. And there's no reason why we shouldn't do that. At the same time, when it comes to something like, go with whatever feels right, whatever, I just watched, so I don't know, we should probably do a podcast on this. Have you even looked at something called Project 2025?
No.
Yeah. So it's a far right Heritage Foundation, 400-page split up, but 400-page document on how to essentially populate a Trump presidential cabinet and all that kind of stuff. What they should work on first, and the first 180 days all laid out. I mean, everything. It's a blueprint. Okay. So I was just clicking through it today, and it's a couple videos up there. And what are the videos? The videos are like America, oh, and bridges and the Statue of Liberty. And so, do they have a message in there? To your point, they do not have a message. The message is, we're glad you're with us. We're glad you're
Sentimentality.
here. We love, yes, exactly. And America is a wonderful place, and we got to be ready for the next administration. We're glad you're here. You have a responsibility to be here, and we want to be here for you. It's like a minute and a half or something. Yeah.
Can I tell you a story?
Yeah.
So 25 years old, I think, just moved to Tokyo, and I was living in this kind of shared house. You have like your own room with your own refrigerator, but the kitchen and bathing facilities is all shared. I'd just been out partying in Shibuya, smoking cigarettes, drinking God knows what. Get back home on the first train back. So, it's Sunday morning and I can't even be bothered to get in the shower. So I just jump into bed thinking of cigarettes and, typical 25-year-old male behavior. At about 11 a.m., I'm awoken at 11 a.m. There's a knock on my door. I assume it's one of my friends from down the hall asking for a cigarette or something. Open the door, and there's this beautiful Japanese girl about the same age as me, dressed in kind of like a suit, very kind of like this.
Oh, okay. Very formal. Okay.
Perfect with a skirt and business clothes, but absolutely gorgeous. And in perfect English, she's like, "Oh, Oh, I'm sorry, did I disturb you? Um, we're holding meditation classes for international residents. We thought maybe if you'd like to learn a bit more about Japanese culture and meet some friends. Okay. Now, I might have attempted more of a conversation with her, but I was hideously hungover
Yes.
at the time. So I just said thank you very much, closed the door, went back to bed, woke up a few hours later, looked at the meditation class. Now, of course, what I'm thinking is like, I'd love to see that girl again.
Yeah.
Meet new people, gain a social circle. These are all needs that
Yes.
people all have, right? And I didn't have a social circle, much of a social circle. I had a couple of friends, but not a big one in Japan. And it's quite hard to find a social circle with Japanese people in Japan because they tend to make their friendships earlier in life. I digress. So, it was very, very tempting. It was playing to all of my sentimental psychological needs.
Yeah.
And so, I read through the thing, I thought about going, and then I looked at the organization name, and it was called Aleph.
Okay.
Have you heard of Aleph?
No.
Have you heard of Aum?
No. Maybe. Maybe.
They were the cult that did the sarin gas bombings in
Yes.
Tokyo that
Yes,
killed
yes,
loads of
yes.
people.
Yes.
And then after Shoko Asahara, which was the leader of the cult, was then arrested and imprisoned, they actually killed him recently. The death penalty, I think it was last year, maybe the year before. The cult changed its name from Aum to Aleph.
Okay.
So this was the way that the cult was recruiting. Outside my former university, you'd see cults recruiting in similar ways. They'd get young, attractive people to go and join the cult. And here's another thing that strikes me about critical social justice and how well it appeals to sentimentality. A lot of the America's top organizations are mainly dominated by males in their 50s and 60s, right? And then, young graduate females come through. Unfortunately, there seems to be some evidence from psychology. Now, I don't have the citations to back me up here either, that men tend to be attracted to younger women far more than they're attracted to women their own age in general.
Yeah, even so here's a fun little again, I'll digress. Fun little study on pheromones. So they can actually have people have women put on, like, you can't smell it, like a body oil or whatever that doesn't smell but does. And so an older woman like myself putting young woman pheromones on them, and more men will approach them. So it's likely to have something to do with, obviously, you know reproduction, right? So
Right.
It's just inborn. It's, so yeah. So even their husbands were more amorous, even though clearly the woman can't produce more children, even in a marriage situation. And they really control these studies. They give them the soap to wash the stuff in, their sheets and their clothes and everything in them, so that there's no other scent. So really fun, really, really fun studies. On just like people smelling stuff in boxes and picking who they want to go out with, and that kind of stuff. So pretty fascinating.
Nothing rational about this, right? You can't make the case that this is rational, because you can't even say, I like that smell, because you're detecting it, but you're not smelling it, right?
Exactly.
So
exactly.
It's not like for example, it's not like a cologne. I love different kinds of cologne.
Correct.
I can say I like this kind of smell, and I like it because this is my taste. Reason, and again, that wouldn't even be reason, because that would be emotional. But reason starts to enter into the process. Whereas with these pheromones, reason can't enter into the process because you're detecting it but not smelling it, right? So,
by the way, there's another study on lap dancers.
Uh-huh.
So, um, lap dancers that were on birth control pills made fewer tips than lap dancers who were not. So,
Wow.
yeah, wow.
And
Wow.
these were,
Yeah.
and you'd speak to these blokes, right? Here's the thing: if you were to apply
They,
reason,
yeah.
and let's say, okay, they're sexually attracted to these lap dancers, so they want to sleep with them. Um, if you were to say apply reason, who would you rather sleep with, the lap dancer who's on birth control or the one who is
Yeah.
not?
Yeah. They would
Reason
say
would be, oh, birth
birth
control,
control.
please, right? Because they don't want to have kids. So I mean, here you go. So the pheromonal, the primordial part of the human brain is overruling reason, and reason in this case is that cannot capture it. The reason now we're capturing it right now because we're referring to scientific studies, but it's basically, it takes a hell of a lot of work for us to bring reason to bear here, to be aware, to be even dimly aware of what's going on. And we certainly can't be aware of it to the extent that that we could perfectly control it in our behavior.
Well, and we would be paralyzed if we did
If
become
we
aware of
tried,
it. I mean,
right?
it's like, should I put one foot in front of the other or should I not?
So
Which
here's the
I don't, what should I buy? Should I eat something now? How, is that cooked yet? I don't know. I mean, we would be paralyzed, completely
so
paralyzed.
should I sign this birthday card with a blue pen or a black pen? You mean you just
Exactly.
lost
I mean,
you
it would
so
be it
Soren
all day
Kierkegaard,
long.
the philosopher Kierkegaard, he basically calls this being lost in the infinite, right? At some
Yes.
point, it becomes rational to make a leap of faith because you can't just keep, should I do this, and as you said, you're just completely paralyzed.
It's called bounded rationality, right?
Is that
So,
Lindblom or
yeah.
Herbert Simon?
Oh, I don't know. It's lots
There's
of people
bounded
talking about
rationality,
that.
and then there's disjointed incrementalism, which is, I think
Thinking.
that Herbert Simon is disjointed incrementalism, but yeah, I've read up on that. Anyway, so here's the point. So we know that these critical social justice ideas are more popular with young people. We also know that there's some recent research that's come out. Actually, again, I'm not prepared, but it's there.
Yeah.
You can find it. Look it up. You'll find it. There's some recent research that says that way more females are now gravitating towards critical social justice than men.
Mm.
So young generation Z, or Z as you Americans like to say, the males tend to actually be gravitating towards conservatism and the females towards critical social justice, which is very, very interesting. So these females, young females with these kind of pheromones that they're not aware of, are going into offices with these older men who are detecting these pheromones and are not aware that they're detecting these pheromones, and it's influencing their behavior. And I suspect that this is one of the reasons why so many powerful men are happy to turn a blind eye to critical social justice, even though it's not in the interest of their company.
Mm.
That it's appealing on a primordial level, and they're not even aware of it.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like most companies are, I mean, they're doing this. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know. What do I know? I'm in education. I don't know if most companies. Because I'm not in corporate America anymore. But you know, uh, and maybe it's because I'm reading so much of it. It feels like it's everywhere to me. So it feels like there's no corner of the universe where it's not. But maybe it's just because I'm immersing myself in this all the time. But I do want to go back to this, Project 2025 thing.
Mm-hmm.
So you watch these little videos, and as you're talking about, it's appealing to, your sense of patriotism and togetherness, and again, I mean, we could talk about how research suggests people have never felt more lonely, than in the last few years. Loneliness, self-reported loneliness has gone up, self-reported depression, that kind of stuff gone up. So it's appealing to this, like, let's come together for this. And who's going to read the 400, I mean, the 900 pages or whatever? Are people who are, it's like you watch that video and I'm like, sure, sign me up. Right. And then I start clicking through this thing and I'm like, holy crap, this is bad. bad. This is like subverting the government, 180-day, like this is using AI to search for to search, whatever your Facebook, everybody's, information to find the best people to be in Donald Trump's, cabinet who will make sure that the 180-day plan happens. That what is it, the second Article 2 or something about that the president has all the power and all the other branches of government are just in service of the president kind of thing. It's like, yeah, this is scary shit. But those videos make it sound pretty good.
No, but this is what I call the identity trap, right? So this is really, so again, human beings have this need for fellowship, a sense of us, an in-group, right? A sense of who we are. And so you appeal to that, firstly, in a very benign way, like Statue of Liberty. It's a great symbol. It's a symbol of liberal democracy. Or it can be used as a symbol of liberal democracy, I should say. And it resonates with people on that level.
It resonates. Yes.
Right. The American flag. It used to make them
there's
cringe.
Plenty of American flags in that minute.
I'm sure they are. Like the like in the wind, right? Like
yes,
waving
exactly.
around. Yes. Yeah. Absolutely right. So there are all these symbols that have kind of resonated with us on a deep level, and we immediately start to think, oh, that reminds me of my childhood, and perhaps your father sitting down saying, I don't know, in my imagination, son, this is America, the land of all that kind of American stuff, and it's easy for me to laugh at, but it actually means something, and the value of that is becoming apparent relative to the extent that you're losing it, and it's being replaced with this woke stuff, which is saying that you've been fooled by all of these messages, and actually America is an evil empire. In a way, both are true, because America's done good things and bad things, but on balance. Yeah. On balance, America has been a massive positive in the world. I think that's unambiguously true. So what's happening is they're getting you to buy into those psychological values. They're basically saying we are the same as you, and then you align yourself with that identity because of the symbols, right? I agree. I'm with you, America. Let's all sing songs together and sing the Star Spangled Banner and wave flags and have fireworks. And as an Englishman, I'm kind of rolling my eyes at all of these stuff, but these rituals are all massively powerful on a psychological level, I think.
Yeah.
In the UK, we'd have the last night of the proms, Land of Hope and Glory, similar kinds of things, God Save the King, God Save the Queen, all of these kinds of things. They're doing it, they're rituals that are reinforcing who we are as a people. Even Helen does it, where she talks about tea all of the time and the correct way of drinking tea. That's kind of a ritual that she's doing to reaffirm her British identity, her English identity. The fact that I wear Harris tweed a lot is a kind of English ritual, right? Reaffirming my identity as being English. We all do it, even if we think that kind of identitarianism is dangerous. We all do it. So they're getting you to buy in with the relatively benign symbols, the Star Spangled Banner, the flag, the Statue of Liberty. Then once your identity is aligned, they're bringing in other stuff. But it's too late then. I'm already aligned with the group. I've already committed to the rituals of the group. I've already made friendship bonds with other people in the group. I am part of this. I cannot get out. And the woke do that with white supremacy, right?
Yeah. And not only that, but we don't even notice what doesn't agree with what we already think the group is.
Right.
We don't even notice that stuff. So we did a podcast on that, right? The way that we pay attention to things, as one example. I mean, that wasn't, but I mean, that's obviously that's a well-established, psychological phenomenon that we engage in confirmation bias. We look for what we already believe, and disconfirmation bias. We essentially don't even notice what's in the environment that doesn't agree with what we already think.
Here's an example of me personally. Right, a few years ago there was a new Ghostbusters film, and the cast were all
it was
female.
women. Yeah,
it was women.
I didn't see that one, but
I did actually. I
yeah.
almost didn't see it. I was like, oh, oh.
What did they do to the Ghostbusters?
Like, why is it all women?
Yeah.
Why does it have to be all women? And then I thought to myself, if they had made an all-women version of the Ghostbusters in the 1990s, how would I have felt?
What? Would have just you'd been like, cool,
Right?
I'll go.
The fact that I've been berated so much was like, oh my god, no, I'm totally biased against this. It didn't help that the trailers were rubbish, but I think even if the trailers had been good, then I would have been, ugh, this is awful. I poisoned myself against it without actually
Right,
watching it. That wasn't reasonable of me to do, right? But
right.
it's not. That's not reason that's working there, right? And I watched the film, and guess what?
I don't know. Did you like it or not?
It was actually quite good. Yeah, it
It
was.
wasn't. Oh,
I think
okay.
the film was actually quite good. Now, by the way, I'm not saying that if you dislike it, you're a bigot.
Yeah,
You
yeah,
might like
right.
it for entirely reasonable reasons.
Yeah,
But no, I surprised myself. So it was actually decent. I thought it was funny. I
yeah.
enjoyed it thoroughly.
Yeah, and this is exactly, where we would say like using just your emotional response would not have worked, right? Your sentimental response was no, 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 not for me. And yet when you went, this is why, this is why this conversation has been going on for hundreds of years, right? Because we can see the advantages of both. But I think, if I'm not wrong, I think what you're sort of suggesting here is that the center of the, most, where most of the U.S. or the U.K. or, is doing too much reasoning and not enough sort of sentimental approach.
Correct.
And I think you're right. And I think that's a symptom uh, of, again, or a manifestation of the way that people in the center already tend to think, which is trying to leave plenty of room for, for lots of discussion and an openness. And we're missing the people who need who will not respond to reason, not because they're closed-minded or because they don't care, or like you said, because they're bigots, or because they're white supremacist, or because they're too woke or whatever, but because, as you pointed out, you're already in the cult, and so there's just simply no way to reason someone out of a cult.
No, there may be a way to appeal to their sentiments to get them out,
Yes, yes,
right?
right.
That's what I think. So I mean, like for example, I mean, before woke was a thing, I was kind of proto woke. Do you know what I mean? I
Hmm.
was kind of programmed to see racism and sexism everywhere, even where it wasn't, and I didn't reason my way out of that, right?
Right, right.
Similarly, I was programmed in my education to see Britain, the British Empire, America, and all of those kinds of things as being essentially, on balance, an imperialist and negative force in the world, largely. That's certainly a thing now, but it was even a thing back then. You know,
Mm,
you were encouraged to kind of, you showed that you were intelligent by the fact that you didn't fall for British and American propaganda. That
okay.
was the thing, right? At university in 2001,
Hmm.
even following 9/11, where there was a kind of a patriotic resurgence, but even then, absolutely, you were supposed to be very skeptical of Israel. You were supposed to be very skeptical of America, and in the UK, especially skeptical of the British Empire, and to regard the British Empire as an evil empire. Even
Hmm.
though I think that the British Empire clearly was a force for good on balance, especially in its later stages when it decided to end slavery at great cost to the Brits. Um, and I, and at that stage, I could have sat down and applied reason and looked at the evidence. And had I have done that, it would have led me to reach a different conclusion. But I had no reason to use reason.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I
I
mean?
think, yeah, and I think you were talking about this the other day when we were talking with Pam, which is something that's not been released yet. But you were talking about how, well, we were both sort of. I was saying, like that there's this whole, in language, like and emotion, you can't learn a word for it until you've experienced it. And
Uh-huh.
so this whole idea, that's one theory, that you can't possibly learn a language for something that you haven't experienced. um, and you were essentially, sort of talking about the same idea, that you know as a community, we have to have a particular consciousness in order to be, ready for change. But as a person also, and so you can, reason. But if somebody doesn't have the, be in the right space, or if they are not in the right community that allows for us to learn those new words and explore those new reasons, then we can't ram it into, we
The
can't ram it
thing
down their throat.
there's no reason. Look, by articulating all of these anti-Israeli, anti-American, anti-British views, as I did back then, I got good scores on my essays. I was appreciated by the people around me, right? Oh, Mike, you're so smart, aren't you brilliant? We all love you, rah, 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 rah. Right? So all of the incentives were for me to use reason, because I was using reason then, but to use reason in a direction that had already been predetermined by emotion.
Hmm. Right. Right.
And not to use reason to actually discover the truth. There was no reason for me to use reason to discover the truth. And we are never, because these people who are coming up with all of these woke arguments, they are using reason, but they are using reason, and so are we, but I'll get to that later. But they're using
Yeah.
we're using
Yeah. Yeah.
reason more than them,
Yeah.
but we come from an emotional place too. But there is no reason for them to use reason other than in the pursuit of conclusions that have been made because of emotion and because of their
Right. And
psychological
that's
needs.
and look, I mean, I want to sort of um I sort of want to catch you on the, you said there was no reason for me to use reason to discover the truth. And one of the things that I talk about in my classes, and we've talked about, just, ourselves, not on the podcast, is that, when do we get to the truth? It's like, no, that's what we do our whole life. Like there is none, right? And there's the truth that we're at right now, and we would like to believe that we're more enlightened, or better, or whatever, than we were yesterday or 10 years ago or whatever. But this is one of the fallacies, I think, that plays into this, especially at the age that you're talking about, the age that we spend most of our time with in college, which is that these are people who are just now getting exposed to reason, to to ideology, to you know, with the good purpose to expose people to lots of different things. And they sort of, gravitate towards something, probably because of sentimentality, right? They get asked, what do you want to major in? Because, what feels right for you, right? And those kinds of things. And so they start exploring sort of more broadly, because they have classes that are required of them that give them a broad education. But then they're encouraged to go with what feels right. And then they get sort of into that thing, and they think that they're then fully baked. They've found their truth. They've found the truth. They've found whatever, because they've done their homework, done their research. And so I think that, so I just wanted to sort of mention, like, you haven't found the truth yet, right? Like, this is why we keep growing and keep thinking, keep reasoning, keep feeling all the time. We're never done,
I
right?
mean, people might see, now you're going to get accused of being a postmodernist here, right? We're not talking about objective reality, okay? We're not talking about gravity. gravity. We're not trying to argue that gravity is socially
No,
constructed,
no, no,
right?
no, no, no,
No,
no. No, I meant like truth as in like, oh, I know
social,
exactly what, now I know exactly what, Britain's, England's
right?
role was in such and such. I know that
Exactly.
we don't.
Truth in terms of
Yeah.
politics and social identity, because
Yes.
human beings on an individual level are far too complicated for even us to understand ourselves. So any statement that we make about ourselves has to be hopelessly reductionist and lose all kinds of
Yes.
stuff, right? We lose all
Yes.
kinds of things about ourselves because we reduce ourselves to a certain set of abstract principles. A society made up of countless hopelessly complex individuals is even more complex. And if you then try to distill that into a set of values by like saying there's such thing as a universal liberalism, for example,
Right.
then you're going to lose even more, right? And you
Hmm.
have to kind of like be comfortable with understanding society as an emergent kind of organism that you really can't
Right.
understand. And if you want to make changes, then and you should make changes, right? Because a society has to adapt. Otherwise, it won't. Other societies will out adapt it, right? And then consume it eventually. So you have to make changes, but you make changes incrementally in the same way that a surgeon will not jump to pull out a scalpel as his first or her first
Right.
recourse, right? Um, that's the kind of political point of view I've come to, albeit begrudgingly, that there can't be any universal values because
Hmm.
political realities emerge out of their contexts, and you can't just come in and impose a whole set of values upon that context because you don't even really know what your values are. You know, you might be able to articulate a set of values that reflect your context, like the Americans did with the Declaration of Independence and the U.S. Constitution. Um, but it was reflective because America as a society existed before that. It's not as if America as a society just came out of nothing. It existed before the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. If not, what was the point of independence? Um, Again, so when I began to realize the worth of Britain and America and places like this, I remember, I remember exactly when it was. It was when I was in China, right? I was having a torrid time in China because my princess girlfriend, who came from a very rich family, this beautiful kind of Chinese, mega, mega rich, her family just decided that they were going to break us up because I wasn't rich enough, essentially. And just something like that wouldn't happen in Britain or America.
Hmm.
Right? Um, or maybe it
And
would, but it would be,
it was just assumed that, well, it's like, well, that's it. So goodbye, right? In
yeah.
China. Yeah, it's like,
And,
good,
and,
that's it.
and just, the amount of, and like the kind of the worship of wealth and
Hmm.
the materialism. And people like to say, oh, Britain and America are really materialistic societies. It's like, no, not if you've been to China or if you've been to the Middle East. No, really no. And they're not at all. I mean, there are materialistic people. You can see materialistic culture, but relative to other countries, really, 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 really
Mm.
no, not at all. Um, maybe it was more materialistic in the 1980s. I hear people saying that. I don't know, but it really isn't. People don't in Britain and America. People don't generally judge your moral worth
Right.
based on how much money you have. If anything,
Right.
quite the contrary,
It's the
actually.
opposite. Yes,
Right.
exactly.
And you could argue unfairly to the contrary, right? It should
Yeah.
never be part of the equation. But anyway, um, so yeah, it wasn't reason, and then like my emotions, my realization of the situation I was in, and the trauma, and my emotions then kicked reason in. And then
Hmm.
reason then led me into finding out the truth about America and actually why and Britain, and why these countries are better places to live and what they've really done to the world, and so on and so forth. So, reason has to be given an emotional kick. And I would say that that's true. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think, I don't think reason has to be given an emotional kick. I do think that we can choose, we can choose to apply reason, whether that's for the better or for the good. Do think we can choose. I do believe that, this overarching superordinate network is more powerful, but that doesn't mean that we can never quiet it. But one of the things I was going to say was that the way that certainly emotion can kick reason in is when we are, those kinds of situations where, really there's no, our emotion system isn't solving the problem, right? So it isn't, you can escape the situation. So you can leave China and get away from that girl, and it doesn't it doesn't help, right? And so, and this is what sort of happened to you was, the emotion system, like it runs crazy for a while, and then essentially it's used up. It gets tired. Okay. And you have to, your body has to make some more of those hormones and everything. And so, you find yourself sleeping a lot, right? When you're
I
really
did, yeah.
overwhelmed and stuff. Yeah. And so your body, it's like you can't run that emotion. Your emotion system can't be in control for too long before it exhausts itself. So it certainly will do that in times of crisis, whether that's being in a war-torn area where you're in danger all the time, or when your emotion, when you're somebody breaks up with you. But so what can happen then is you get in this spiral, okay, and you no one could have told you when you're in this this confused state, okay, when nothing explains what's going on with you. So research on terminal illness finds that people are in this, they're in sort of this phalanx of uh, there's no story that fits. So they do, you do go, there's a couple of ways to go. You could have gone total sentimentality, right? You could have maybe found religion, or something like that, or you went to reason. But someone from the outside cannot give the person who has a terminal illness either a reason to live, or the spirit, the feeling that they're going to maybe make the best of the time that they have, or whatever it is. Like, we can't overlay either a reason or a sentiment onto someone who's in that chaos, right? And so I think that the chaos that we're in right now, especially in America, um, but in the world, right? I mean, we just had the drone attack on the US military, and, I mean, the world is shaky right now, right? We are in this chaos. And so we could go either way. We could go full on sentimentality, right? And just, like, I don't know, like America first, right? At all costs, no matter what, we just wave the flag and, protect our borders and just, kill everybody else, whatever. I don't know what that means, full on patriotism. Or we could do full on reason, and that's not going to work either, right? I mean, it's just not.
Let's use the protect the border thing, right? This is a really interesting example of sentimentality, about how
Mm-hmm.
well the American right are playing to sentimentality. So,
Yes.
no, okay, let's start by giving the devil his due. By the way, I think there's a devil on the left as well, in case you're...
Yes.
And we talk far more about the devil on the left than we do on the devil on the right.
Yes, we do. Yes.
And there are plenty of people who are centre-right who I think are perfectly reasonable. And there are plenty of people I think who are centre-left who are perfectly reasonable
Yeah.
as well. Anyway, so let's give the devil his due. Are there drug cartels who are taking advantage of waves upon waves of illegal immigration into the United States in order to get drugs, not just things like cocaine, but also fentanyl, some of the really weird drugs that cause this kind of zombie type behavior that we saw in Denver, which was just absolutely shocking to me. And is this a massive problem? Absolutely.
Yeah.
Are terrorists managing to get through on the border? Highly likely.
Probably.
Probably. Does this result in an increased likelihood of a serious terrorist attack in the United States? Almost certainly, yes.
Maybe.
Is human trafficking, sex slaves and that kind of thing happening as well as a consequence of a loosened border? Probably also true. But two things can be true at the same time, or multiple things can be true at the same time. We can say, yes, these are all problems. And yes, if you made the border ironclad, less immigrants would get through and less of that would happen. The problem is that illegal immigration in America is an institution upon which the American economy is wholly dependent.
Right.
So, okay, I mean, not just the American economy, by the way. Illegal immigration into the United States of America is an institution upon which the economy of the United States of America and many other economies are wholly dependent upon.
That makes sense, yeah.
Well, for example, America is the leading exporter of agricultural products. Okay.
And migrant workers
do a lot, if not most, then at least a very significant portion of that work. If you get rid of those illegal immigrants, if you make the border tight, okay, and this is another conservative argument, by the way. This is the difference. This highlights the difference between a philosophical conservative and somebody who calls himself conservative, right? No, because I'm like, if you want to make changes, then you better do them incrementally, because if you make a radical change, then you might solve problems A, B, and C, but cause a way worse problem to occur.
Right.
So let's run through the thought experiment of what would happen. So, okay, let's imagine that you are able to seal the border shut. So you have completely ended illegal immigration into America. Let's talk about the positives. Human trafficking, that will go away. Terrorist infiltration, some of them might come in on tourist visas, but definitely there'll be a lot less of that. The drug problem, you'd probably pretty much solve that if you shut the border down completely. Okay, all of those things are positives. The food would then start rotting in the fields in America. So the price of groceries in America, the price of food in America would skyrocket. There's the potential that poorer people in America might even go hungry, like in the Great Depression, people did, right? And there would be famine in the developing world. Right? So
I got news for you. Yeah. Somebody else would make the drugs.
Yeah. Probably within the United States.
Yes, that's what I mean. Yeah, exactly.
But
exactly.
You see what I mean, right? Because supply and demand, there would be, you might get a higher cost, there might be less of it, but there would be another way of doing it. So by solving a problem in that way, you create all these other problems. And that's why a philosophical conservative would never say, let's close the border down. They would say, okay, what incremental steps can we have that enables us to have a better understanding of who's coming in and who's not coming in? But the Republican Party aren't going with that. And they know, right? They know everything that I've just said, right? They know that they're playing to irrationality. They know that they're playing to sentimentality, because that's what's going to get them elected. And
because we have somebody who said it's poisoning, immigrants are poisoning the blood.
I mean, that's a kind of silly thing. I mean, I don't know who goes along with that. I mean, that's outrageously kind of blood and soil kind of.
Well, it is, but it riles up the crowd. But people cheer. Yeah. It's the sentiment. I'm talking about the sentimentality part of it. But people cheer and they get all excited.
But what is the one word they are using right now? And as soon as you stop and think about it, it is just transparently dishonest. They're using the term invasion.
Yes.
It's not a fucking invasion.
Yeah.
There's nobody coming in with guns or swords and shields and horseback, planting a flag over towns or nothing. That's not happening. It's people who want to live in America, largely.
Right.
Now, you can say that that's bad and the rest of it. You can make I'm not making the case that you can't say that illegal immigration doesn't have negatives. I'm not saying that. But it's certainly not an invasion. And so what the right are doing is that they're playing to the sentimentality in the same way that woke people did. Woke people did it with white supremacy. Everybody hates Hitler and the KKK for lots of very good reasons. So, come and join us. We'll fight the Nazis and the KKK. Oh, but by the way, we're now going to change the definition of it so it now includes all of these things as well. So the right say, well, okay, there's an invasion going on. Oh, my God, we're being invaded. That's why, texts are saying, "Oh, we have the right to, we can defy the Supreme Court because, the Constitution gives us a higher right because we are defending ourselves against an invasion." You're not defending
Hmm.
yourselves against an invasion.
Right.
It doesn't follow from me saying, by the way, that you're not defending yourself from an invasion, that limiting illegal immigration is wrong or not. That doesn't follow.
Right.
But I'm just saying that the point I'm trying to make is that how people are being manipulated by appeals to sentimentality. And here's the.
And
Go ahead.
well, I was just going to say, and this sort of reason-based, uh, center, whether it's center right to center left, this reason-based tendency that we have is actually, we're actually, hurting our own cause by, you could, because you can't, once somebody has bought the invasion, the poisoning of the blood, that, once they bought into that, there's just simply, you can't say, well, that's just, if you said to somebody who, had just been to a Trump rally, oh, that's just silly, that, I mean, do you think that would go over well? No, it would not.
No, what would go over? Oh, that's just silly. Is kind of a dismissal that may or may not be based on reasoning. That that might
Right, but I'm
that
just
might
saying
be
you just
ignored.
could.
What would go over even worse is the kind of rational response that we've just articulated,
Yeah,
right?
no, I know. That's what I'm saying. Like, there's just no entry point. There's
No,
no entry point. It's
but,
talking about closed borders. I mean, those.
yeah, but let's flip it around onto us as well, because we're not, like, I think that. So why is it that I don't use all of my knowledge of critical social justice to infiltrate a critical social justice movement and make myself king of it? Why don't I do
Oh,
that?
yeah,
Because that
yeah.
would be
Why
what
don't you?
reason would do. Reason would determine I should do something like that. That would be how I, if I was a young man in my 20s and I decided to do something like that, that would be how I got dated the best looking woman, got the best job, got the most money, got the biggest house. I could have used that to do that. Why didn't I do that? Because emotionally I can't do that, right? Because again, like, my reason is subordinate to my sentimentality, and my sentimentality tells me that there is something that is, to use a kind of Immanuel Kant, a deontological way of looking at the world, is a priori wrong. And I can't see right and wrong in terms of pure consequentialism like that. There's a decision that is much more fundamental, that is prior to me thinking about, to this rationalizing what would the consequences of me, just says that is fundamentally wrong, and it overrides everything else. And so, even when it comes to somebody like Steven Pinker or Helen Pluckrose, it's a similar thing. They're very rational and they use reason more than most people do. I would argue that we use reason more than most people do. And I would argue that I would like people to use reason more than they do. But even for us, on a fundamental level, our action is guided more by emotion than it is by reason.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and we don't. I mean, until I got canceled,
There you go.
I was not. I was not paying attention to this. Did I kind of know it was happening? Yeah, but I wasn't paying attention. Um, And so, that's another issue. It's like, as we're just sort of like chugging along, until we get tripped up, until we, until something happens, like, you weren't really thinking about the difference, in sort of Chinese culture and, what it might mean for, in your relationship until it happened. And there's, to some extent, there's really no reason for us, like you were just saying, there's no reason for us to reason, right? Until there's a reason for us to reason. And so about everything we do, but about everything, we can't possibly reason about everything all day long, and so we pick and choose. And I think when extremes are off, when the extremes are offering easy rules, that feels a lot of times like, even, it can even feel like reason, because it's a rule. It's a rule that, white people are racist, inherently racist. And so, if I'm not sure about, the way, the tone of someone's voice, or whether they bumped into me, in the hallway on purpose, or then the rule is that it was a slight of some sort. And so that makes it easier to, to navigate other things. So right now, for you and me, there are we are also following certain rules guided by sentimentality. And so, or that we were drawn to, I guess, and so we default to those because we simply can't think about everything all the time.
No, um, but we have to figure this one out because the
Yeah.
right are very, very good. Well, the first thing we need to do is we need to make people aware of this problem. We need to make people in the center aware of the fact that we're doomed if we can't figure out how to appeal better to sentimentality. We need to figure out a sentimental play. Israel, very much. I mean, you look at the kind of the IDF videos running around saying, look, here are the guns, here are the bullets, here is what's happened, here is this, and then like laying out all of these arguments in a super rational way, and nobody's listening to them. The people who are already sentimentally bought in to Israel, the Jews, of course, are listening to them, and they're quite right to say.
Well, yeah, because that's bolstering their. So now they not only have the sentiment, but they also have all the reasoning.
Yeah.
So it's like that's working, but
you
already got those people.
Yeah, you've already got them.
Yeah.
The trouble is that they haven't got anyone else. And so Israel is going to need to figure this one out really quickly because the Chinese and we think the Qataris, certainly the Russians, have managed to use this oppressor oppressed thing, which is appeals brilliantly. It's so easy to get on a reason level. So this massive oversimplification that seemingly applies to anything, but once you think it through, doesn't really apply to anything at all. Is really easy to get and is very, very sentimental. Very, very sentimental. So we are missing a trick here, and we need to figure this out quick. Otherwise, society is going to pull itself apart. With the radical left being very, very good at appealing to sentimentality and the radical right being very, very good at sentimentality. And as we've seen, in the center, we've seen people from the center being pulled away to the right.
Yes, especially to the right. Yes.
Especially to the right. We've seen people who have resisted all of the woke stuff, have used reason to call out wokeism and been very good at that. Only to be pulled over by a similarly, overly sentimental kind of entity on the right. So we need to figure out how to do sentimentality in the center. Otherwise, we are doomed, and nobody's doing it. Okay. So, on that note, I am going to try and put my Machiavellian mind to work, knowing that this is exactly the sort of thing that a Machiavellian should be doing. And that underlines why certain personality traits that are denigrated in the dark triad are actually entirely necessary, as Elizabeth keeps reminding me. Good. Yes. Thank you very much.